Hello everyone. Today I'll begin with the explanation of the essay Freedom by G.B. Shaw. Unit 1. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, I have no time to talk the usual old nonsense about freedom tonight. Let us come to business. So at the very beginning, Shaw makes one thing clear, that he does not want to get involved in any kind of nonsensical talks. He wants to come straight away to the point, and the point is to talk about or to discuss about freedom. What freedom is. What is perfectly free person? So he raises a question. What is a perfectly free person? Evidently a person who can do what he likes, when he likes and where he likes, or do nothing at all if he prefers it. So he has given a definition of a free person, where he says that we can say that a person who has a complete control over his activities, where he can do whatever he wants to do, whatever he likes to do, whenever he likes to do, wherever he likes to do. And if he prefers not to do anything, then he is free to do nothing. So this is the clear definition of what a free person is. Next he says, well, there is no such person, and there never can be any such person. So Shaw says that this concept of a free person, a perfectly free person, is just an illusion. In reality, there cannot be a person who is completely free. Whether we like it or not, we must all sleep for 1/3 of our lifetime. Wash and dress and undress. We must spend a couple of hours eating and drinking. We must spend nearly as much in getting about from place to place. So now he is enlisting a few things, a few activities which we are bound to do, whether we like it or not. And what are these things? He says that we have to sleep for 1/3 of our lifetime. So whatever is the span of our lifetime, 1/3 of the time is consumed in sleeping. Then next he says, wash and dress and undress. Okay, we have to take bath, we have to clean ourselves, we have to dress and then undress according to the occasion, according to the time. We must spend a couple of hours eating and drinking. Okay, so the basic requirements are to be fulfilled. We need to eat, we need to drink, all these things are to be fulfilled. We must spend nearly as much in getting about from place to place, and at the same time we have to move about from one place to another. So these are a few activities which we have to do, whether we want to or we don't want to. Next he says, for half the day we are slave to necessities which we cannot shirk. Whether we are monarchs with 1,000 servants or humble laborers with no servants but their wives. So he says that for half the day we are slave to necessities which we cannot shirk. We cannot run away from the basic necessities of life. So we are slave to them for half of the day. Now, when he is talking about being a slave, he says that there is no difference between a monarch or a servant or a laborer. He says that whether it is a monarch with thousands of servants to attend at him or a simple laborer, both are bound to do certain things to fulfill their basic necessities. So he says that whether a person is a monarch with 1,000 servants or he is a laborer who has no servants but only a wife to serve him as a servant. So he is being a bit sarcastic over here. Next he says, and the wives must undertake the additional heavy slavery of childbearing if the world is still to be peopled. So he says that the wives are not simply categorized as being servants of their husbands, but at the same time they have this extra liability of bearing children. If the world has to be populated, then the wives are liable to bear children. These natural jobs cannot be shirked. So he says that these are some natural requirements of life from which we cannot run away. We have to fulfill these requirements of life, whether we want to or we don't want to. But they involve other jobs which can. But in order to fulfill these natural jobs, there are certain more activities which are involved which we can avoid. As we must eat, we must first provide food. Okay, so if we want to eat, we must have food with us. As we must sleep, we must have beds. So if we want to sleep, if we want to take rest, there should be a bed in the house. And bedding in houses with fireplaces and coals. So if it's a cool weather, so we need to have a fireplace besides our bed. As we must walk through the streets, we must have clothes to cover our nakedness. So these are the basic requirements. If we want to move around in public on the streets, we need to cover our body. Now, food and houses and clothes can be produced by human labor. So we can input our labor in order to produce food, house and clothes to fulfill our basic requirements, our necessities. But when they are produced, they can be stolen. So if we have certain assets with us, if we are able to produce food or house or clothes, the fact remains that these things can be stolen away. If you like honey, you can let bees produce it by their labor and then steal it from them. He says that if you want to consume honey, then you will allow the bees to produce honey so that you can use it. Okay, so honeybees are going to input their labor, and this labor we are going to consume in form of honey. So we are actually stealing their production from them. If you are too lazy to get about from place to place on your own legs, you can make a slave of a horse. So he says that if we are lazy enough to move on our own from one place to another, so we can easily make a slave of a horse. So we can ride on a horse to move from one place to another. And what you do to a horse or a bee, you can also do to a man or a woman or a child if you can get the upper hand of them by force or fraud or trickery of any sort, or even by teaching them that it is their religious duty to sacrifice their freedom to yours. So he says that if we can make animals or insects our slaves, then it is quite easy for us to make human beings our slave, whether it is a man, a woman or a child. But the condition which is required is that we should be powerful enough, or we should be in a very dictating position so that we can make another man, woman or child our slaves. Now if we have this upper hand, what we can adopt is we can use force or fraud or trickery of any kind, or we can even be tactful enough to teach these people whom we are going to turn into our slaves that it is their religious duty to sacrifice their freedom to us. Okay, so in case we want to make a person our slave, whether it is a man or a woman or a child, we have many measures to make them our slaves. We can use force, fraud, trickery. We can teach them that it is their duty to give away their freedom and be our slaves. So beware. If you allow any person or class of persons to get the upper hand of you, they will shift all that part of their slavery to nature that can be shifted onto your shoulders. So he says that I am trying to alert you or make you aware of this condition, that if you allow any other person to dominate you, or class of persons to dominate you, who can have an upper hand over you, then what they will do? They will shift all their responsibilities, all their liabilities towards nature, these natural jobs which they have to fulfill. They can easily shift the responsibility of fulfilling all these basic jobs onto your shoulders. Okay, so he's trying to say is that we should always maintain a kind of control over our dignity, our own existence, so that any other person cannot take advantage, undue advantage of us by making us their slaves. So he says that if we allow any other person to dominate us, then they can easily shift their own responsibilities or their slavery to nature onto our shoulders. And you will find yourself working for 8 to 14 hours a day, when if you had only yourself and your family to provide for, you could do it quite comfortably in half the time or less. So he says that he's giving here a simple calculation. He says that if you allow any other person to dominate you and you become his slave, what will happen? You will find that you are working for 8 to 14 hours a day. And on the contrary, if you are working as an independent person only for yourself and your family, then you can do all the chores, all the works in half the time, or even less than that. Okay, when we are talking about slavery at that time, as slaves, we'll have to work for 8 to 14 hours. But if we are working as an independent person, then in order to fulfill our own responsibilities or the responsibilities of our family, then it will take only half the time or even less than that. The object of all honest governments should be to prevent your being imposed on in this way. So he says that the objective of every government which works in an honest manner, their objective, prime objective, should be to prevent you from being a slave of somebody else. The objective, the aim of the government should be to prevent you from any kind of slavery or exploitation. Next he says, but the object of most actual governments, I regret to say, is exactly the opposite. So he says that the fact is, and he is really feeling regretful in stating this thing, that the objective of most of the real governments is just opposite to what he had earlier stated. Okay, he mentioned earlier that the objective should be to prevent every individual from slavery. But on the contrary, the real objective of all the actual governments is just the opposite of this. What the governments do? They enforce your slavery and call it freedom. They actually execute your slavery and give it the tag of freedom. But they also regulate your slavery, keeping the greed of your masters within certain bounds. So what they do? They inflict slavery upon us, but they even regulate our slavery. And how they regulate it? By devising certain laws or formulating certain laws wherein we cannot be exploited to that extreme extent to which we can be. So these laws or these rules and regulations can impose a kind of control over the masters. When chattel slavery of the Negro sought costs more than wage slavery, they abolish chattel slavery and make you free to choose between one employment or one master and another. Now see, he is giving a very witty example over here. He says that if we talk about chattel slavery, now what is chattel slavery? It is a kind of practice wherein the Negroes, they are sold and purchased as slaves, as an as a kind of article or property. They are sold and they are purchased. This is chattel slavery. So he says that when chattel slavery of the Negro costs more than wage slavery, when we are talking about the working of people on daily wages, if the chattel slavery costs more than the daily wage slavery, then what government will do? They will quickly abolish chattel slavery and they will give you the option of wage slavery. wherein they will give you choice that you can be slave of this master or that master. You can choose your own master or your own employment. So this way or that, you are going to be a slave. So the governments are smart enough. They will abolish one kind of slavery and impose another kind of slavery upon you. And this they call a glorious triumph of freedom, though for you it is merely the key of the street. So he says that the government will give this the name of victory of freedom. But for an individual, it is another kind of slavery which will draw him to street. When you complain, they promise that in future you shall govern the country for yourself. And if you try to raise your voice against this kind of exploitation, then the government will promise that in future you will be the governing body of the country. So the slaves are assured or given an assurance that next time definitely you will be in power. You are going to form the government of the country. They redeem this promise by giving you a vote and having a general election every 5 years or so. So how they redeem? Redeem means they compensate what they have done. They'll try to compensate it by giving you the right to vote and constituting general election for every 5 years or so. And what happens during elections? He mentions, at the election, two of their rich friends ask for your vote, and you are free to choose which of them you will vote for to spite the other. Okay, what will happen? During the elections, what happens is that two of the close eyes of the politicians, they will approach you and they will ask you, please vote for them. So what you are going to do? You are going to vote for one person and you are going to cheat upon the other person. You are going to ditch another person. A choice which leaves you no freer than you were before, as it does not reduce your hours of labor by a single minute. So this right to vote is a kind of choice which will not leave you free in any manner. Okay, you will be a slave as you were before. You are not going to set free due to this right to vote, because it is not going to reduce your working hours as a laborer. It is not going to reduce your working hours even by a single minute. So this right to vote is not going to bring any kind of change in the conditions of the slaves. But the newspapers assure you that your vote has decided the election and that this constitutes you a free citizen in a democratic country. So the irony is that the newspapers will give you the assurance that you are the makers of the government. So the main power is in your hand because you have the right to vote. You are the decision maker of the elections. And this election has set you as a free citizen in a democratic country. You are a citizen of a democratic country. This is the assurance given by the newspapers after the election results. The amazing thing about it is that you are fool enough to believe them. So he says that the most amazing part of this entire plot is that you are easily befooled by such things and you easily believe in what is being served to you, what is being taught to you, what is being given to you, and you are so simple at heart that you easily believe in what is happening with you, and you start believing that yes, we are the kingmakers. And the fact remains that nothing changes due to your right to vote. You always remain a slave and your destiny does not change. So with this we come to the end of unit 1. So we will begin with second unit in the next lesson. That's all for today. Thank you.